Yes, welcome back. This is F a Rap Critic. I'm your boy Malik16. And no, imaginate is not a real word, but we're going to try to use our imaginations today as we go through the rap ruler. Y'all know I couldn't leave y'all the wrap up the year without hitting you with the compliment episode. Clean it up nicely with a bow on it, only fitting for the holiday season. Hope you and yours out there having a good one. Want to send an early birthday shout out to April Walker, the creator of Walker Wear, who we were blessed to have on the first episode, category 1 of this album review. She chose this album, and probably one of the most classic albums out of all the classics that we're going to review on this channel, but also probably one of the quickest episodes. I'm not really going to tell you anything that you don't already know about this album. What can I say? If you don't know what we're talking about, if you can't tell by the background, by the sneaker box up there, the Ewing Special Edition, we're talking about none other than the debut album, Paid in Full, by Eric B. and Rakim. We're just going to jump into it. You already know the drill. It's a little new scenery, new background, but the same old system. If you have not already, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, and go visit theraprouleur.com while you're at it. Sign up, leave your votes, leave your rankings on all the albums that we've ever covered using the system. There's more to come in the new year, new season dropping. I want to thank all of you for rocking with us, getting us past that 1K mark, getting us into this monetization phase. It only gets better, y'all. Let's jump into it. This is category 2, where we go over the rap performance on this album. First dimension in category 2 is going to be personality and charisma. All right, we've been here before when we reviewed Follow the Leader by Rakim. We talked about his deadpan presence on the microphone, his no joke, straight up serious. This is the debut album. He's a little bit more youthful here, but the messaging and the presence is no difference. It's still this quiet menace, this straight up seriousness, and he begins the album by telling you he's no joke, emphasizing that point on each verse, telling you that it could end up in threats of violence. You can get smacked for this. When he's done, then you could joke. So, I mean, that is pretty much the driving force and feeling that Rakim gives you throughout the whole album. He's very serious about the microphone. He's very serious about performing and pleasing the crowd without being a jester or a clown for you all. He commands your full attention and demands and expects your full attention, but he promises to give you nothing but a dope show that validates that command of your attention. He's also very serious about his 5% teachings and beliefs. He repeats that all throughout, almost as much as he mentions the microphone and what he does on it. And then third, money. The album's called Paid in Full. You're going to get the idea that money is a driving force and factor here. Not a lot of roles being played except for that of the showman and the threat to everybody. Quiet storm, pretty much. And there's no ladies man role here. There's no slick guy role. There's not a lot of flash. You know, he says a beat like this might tempt me to cold show my rings and my fat gold chain, but it's really not about that here. The videos more so showcase that aspect, but lyrically, not getting a lot of that. So, I mean, it's a short album if you're not counting the Eric B instrumentals, so it doesn't give you a lot of room to tap into all these different dimensions of Rakim, and frankly, it doesn't give you space to care because you're focused on what he's talking about and how much you buy into that. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, which naturally takes us to dimension 2, where we're talking about the believability and suspension of disbelief. This is not an album, because there's no roles being played, that asks you to suspend your disbelief. Eric B using his government name and initial, and Rakim using his attribute since entering the Nation of the Gods and Earths as a teenager. So we only know him as Rakim. We don't get to meet the man as William Griffin. We just get Rakim Allah, and we take it because his ass was given to us. Yeah, I've never heard anybody try to pull his card and pull a Cassius Clay on Rakim. His mama name him William, I'm gonna call him William. Nah, we're not getting that. My name is Rakim Allah, and he repeats that message throughout. We talked about that briefly in video 1, in category 1, where we talked about the repetition factor. He is intentionally branding his name because he's serious about his attribute and he wants you to get familiar with it. And he says, that's why I came, to teach those who can't say my name. He lets you know, he spells it out for you, he abbreviates it for you. I mean, he says it backwards. So no pretense is being assumed here, but at the same time, he's also not saying much outside of the realm of the three things that I mentioned, where we're talking about the microphone, the gods and the earths, and money, and represent New York. There's a little Long Island sprinkled in there, but he's not talking about day-to-day endeavors. So of course the title track verse comes into question, and I love how this verse in particular has been dissected over the years. It was well put in somebody's argument about the state of hip-hop and how crime rap has always been there. In one of our critical clips, we talk about how crime rap has been like a prevalent thing throughout hip-hop since the turn of the 80s going into the 90s, right? But what Rakim does, and this was pointed out, he always adds that layer of responsibility. And Rakim has said it himself in his book. I used to be a stick-up kid, so I think of all the devious things I did. Everybody focuses on the clever syncopation of the I used to roll up. This is a holdout. Ain't nothing funny. Stop smiling. Still don't nothing move but the money. But you can't have that line sequence without what comes before it, what precedes it, and what comes after it, right? I used to be a stick-up kid, so I think of all the devious things I did. And then he says, but now I learn to earn because I'm righteous. Very important parts of that whole rhyme, that whole verse. And so, of course, it comes up to the question of how much do we believe Rakim on this album? Well, since that's the only track where he makes any reference of a life outside of rocking the microphone, it leaves it as a standout, but it also is brought across with the same tenacity, with that same quiet menace as everything that he's talking about on the mic. So it kind of really, really limits the room for disbelief. And this is backed up, of course, by Rakim's autobiography, where he tells you how he dipped and dabbled for a hot second in the street life, mostly because of who he rode with. And even outside of that, when he stopped, this is who he kept in his circle. No one's ever questioned the fact, or it's well known that Rakim used to run with some of the most notorious gangsters, like street dudes from the era that we're talking about, which is famously referred to as the golden era. We're talking about the late 80s going into the early 90s. We dropped some of those names in video 1. He's dropped some of the names throughout his career on different albums, and they're pictured on the back cover of this album. And lends this subtle confidence of, I don't need to say it on wax. You see the proof right here. I'm not going to brag about it. And as we've always been taught in the hood, the quiet ones are the ones you got to look out for, the ones who are not the loudest in the room screaming and bragging how real they are. And that's always kind of been Rakim's presence. So yeah, not a lot of time spent on it. And on this album, it has that opposite effect of making you really digest it as okay, because it's the one piece where you hear it. Everything else is very, very focused on rocking the mic. Even his claims on the microphone are not out of this world. It's just about being the best MC at a party, being the best MC in a contest, at a show, and on wax. He might take you through triple stage darkness on this album, more God body talk, but he doesn't start taking you to outer space and the constellations to the next album. And even that is, no pun intended, grounded and has some gravity to it. So yeah, as far as this album, really tough to debate how believable it is when on 8 songs, those are the claims. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 3, the use of voice and delivery. Again, this is a younger Rakim, so there's a freshness, but there's also that signature nasal but strong quality. So we're not talking about a high-pitched, whiny nasal. It's a projected but calm and controlled nasal. Like I play around, it's been joked that I favor Rakim, so I've played around and perfected my Rakim impersonation. It's a common New York accent, and it's one of the most nasal voices in hip hop that has never been tested, questioned, ridiculed. It just works because of the control and the underlying seriousness and bite to Rakim's words. I've heard people refer to Rakim's style as monotone, but monotone wouldn't be the exact word. It's probably a notch and a half above what monotone is, if anybody knows the technical word for level above that, because there's enough inflections to separate how he's saying his words and how he's delivering these verses, right? So we talked about Guru when we talked about the Moment of Truth album, and I'm sure we'll talk about Guru a lot as we review more Gangstar albums. Guru is my quintessential definition of a monotone rapper because he really, really does not put a lot of push historically into how his words change up and come across. With Rakim, you're going to get emphasis on certain words. You're going to get words that he lets linger. I'm not bold just because I rock gold. Rakim is on the mic, and you know I got soul. He's referenced his own style as being patterned after the saxophone, which he's trained in playing, and you can hear him modulate his own voice. The tone is not the most changing, but the inflections save it from being this monotonous, this kind of dry thing. And I think that's that piece that people can't really articulate when they talk about how Rakim changed the game by making things calm. If we're talking about modulation, he'll down pitch a little bit. The best example I can think of at the top of my head is on As the Rhyme Goes. In his regular voice, he goes, "When the crowd is moving, I compete with the mix. The rougher the cuts, the rougher the rhyme gets." Especially on those pockets where he's going to end the verse. Because all you need is soul, self-esteem, and release. The rest is up to you. Rakim will say peace. Or, because I'll be in the crowd if you ain't controlling it. Drop the mic, you shouldn't be holding it. It's like this build-up that's rhythmic at the same time. And so you'll hear that throughout the album. He does it a lot on As the Rhyme Goes On. And I Know You Got Soul in particular. And you'll see that all throughout. The album was recorded pretty quickly, but some of these singles were released before others. My Melody and Eric B. is President, being songs that were released before the 1987 debut. They came out in 1986, and My Melody was his first official recording, and you can hear just certain things like turn up the bass, check out My Melody. There's a little bit more projection because historically, the legend goes that he recorded this with MC Shan and Marley Marl present, and they were just like badgering him to try it so many different ways, and he kept insisting on doing it his way, where he's comfortable in his zone, which was unprecedented in hip-hop at that time. And some of these verses you might hear pieces of those different takes have influence on how he's saying certain lines. And of course, that's a younger version of him. So by the time you get these 1987 cuts like I Ain't No Joke or Move the Crowd, there's a little bit more force in how he's projecting. How can I move the crowd? First of all, and so on and so forth. So again, if you take any words from this description of how his delivery is on this album, we're going to be looking at the words control, calm, nasal, but with push and inflection. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 4, the flow. Now, probably the most talked about feature of Rakim's entrance into the game is how he changed the patterns. A lot of people credit him for internal rhymes and more complex rhyme structures overall. But when we think about setups, this is not new to the game. It's the fact that this was his style. That's what made it a pioneering sound. So we've heard other rappers do this. Kumo D was doing internal rhymes, and LL Cool J may have, had a couple of these kind of patterns too. And Fresh Prince, who came out the year before, also had some of these patterns. But for this to be your style means that you're packing syllables and doing this rhyme sequence repeatedly verse for verse, different songs. And we're talking back in the day, most of these songs having 4 verses. Um, and so it became a style that's associated with him. And you match that with the fact that he's bringing this calm control to the game in the midst of the majority of rappers doing, these belted out flows. Oh, it's groundbreaking. The flow patterns on the track like move the crowd, and as the rhyme goes on, they have more continuity than the flow patterns on I Ain't No Joke. I used to let the mic smoke. Now I slam it on the but it's ending bars and how they lean into the next line. And Rakim says his writing style used to be by putting dots to mark where the bars and where the rhyming words would land. And on his way to the rhyming words, he's going to put 1 or 2 words that rhyme with each other, so it kind of hits these consonant marks before they land on where you expect them to land. So you're getting the unexpected between the expected. So an example of a carryover, right? If you just keep kicking, listen to the mix and think you'll sink into the rhyme like quicksand. Or the only time I stop is when somebody drop and then bring them to the front because my rhyme's the oxygen. That's what we mean about carryover. That mix and going with quicksand, somebody dropping then oxygen. We take examples like, so I walk down the street whistling this, then because man, do I miss me and Ada, me and Eric being a nice big plate of fish, which is my favorite dish, but without no money, it's still a wish, so that those flow switch ups that carry. And right now, thinking about a line like that spilling over to the next with that Plata seems a little lazy, but back then, especially coming off of a sequence like that, oh man, that set the stage for what we saw Big Daddy Kane do on his album that came out the year later. And a lot of rappers started doing that and hanging that off with more control. Because before, again, if I'm doing this early 80s style, it's like, man, then Plata, he's doing this in a ping pong kind of feel. And then we talk about the pacing. Pacing dictates how he rides the beat. So a track like I Know You Got Soul is one of the more up-tempo tracks on the album, and he's just gliding on that. Now, if you from uptown, Brooklyn bound, screen or Long Island sound, either of the crews come right and exact. It ain't where you're from, it's where you're at. He's matching that bass line. He's jumping between where the bass line lands and hopping all on top of that, as opposed to my melody where he's just kind of dragging the words out. Why waste time on a microphone? All right, so my melody is probably the most dragged out flow on the whole album. And again, we compare that to tracks where his voice sounds lighter, either because he was projected more or mostly because they were recorded at different times when he was at least a year younger or so. Take that into consideration, but it adds to this feeling of range. Another thing he does delivery wise, we talked about him playing with the ups and downs of his own voice. Of course, when he's switching flows, you'll hear that highlighted if you're really tuned in. So I think about what he did on Move the Crowd, and he goes, for those that know me, indeed I like to flow. What possessed him to lead it off like that, to go up with the know me, and then indeed I like to flow. It's a little melodic presence to that, right? So to follow that up with more ups and downs in just one sentence, especially when the music's going slow, it's almost like he's scatting, right? So for those that know me, indeed I like to flow, especially when the music's going. It's a very jazzy swing that he's added just to the sequence here, because then he breaks it down again, because his next line is more simple. It gives me a chance to let everybody know it's time to bust out the Rakim show, as the piano's going doon 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 doon. And of course he goes into another sequence, which is the intelligent wise on the mic, I will rise right in front of your eyes. Okay, and that's what I mean about he's doing styles of flow that have been done before. as you're hearing this all together, it just has a refreshing quality because it's like, okay, you're gonna hear stuff that most rappers of the time would do, like the intelligent wise on the mic, I will rise right in front of your eyes. Picture that with somebody else's cadence, like Curtis Blow or somebody from any of the older groups, right? That's a typical 80s flow, early 80s flow that, still found its way into the mid 80s. But then, and probably the best example of what we mean about how he ushered in the era of internal rhyme schemes or the beginning of more complex rhyme schemes is what he does at the end of that verse on Move the Crowd. We're going to break it down right now. He goes, "It's actual fact. It's not an act. It's been proven indeed, and I proceed to make the crowd keep moving." Look at how many rhyming vowel sounds there are before we get to the main rhyme point, right? The only rhyming words here that are in the traditional sense are proven and moving, but they don't even land on the same bar count. They just sonically land at points that make sense where it matches up and evens out by the end of that 2 lines there, right? But actual fact is not an act. He didn't have to do that, but that has this percussive element to it where it's pleasing to hear right next to each other. And then he goes, "It's been proven indeed," where right before getting to moving, the rhyme with proven, he's going to also slip in, "I proceed," to rhyme with that. And he didn't have to do that. And he tells you, again, in any of his interviews and in his book, he tells you it was important for him to do things like that just to test himself, just to challenge himself and not be as predictable as something like the other sequence I just mentioned, where it's like intelligent, wise on the mic, I will rise right in front of your eyes because I'm a surprise, right? It's like, okay, cool, we saw those coming a mile away, but he's doing that after that jazz swing, after a more simple line that comes in between there. "So I'm gonna let knowledge be born to a perfection. All praise is due to Allah," and that's the blessing. Simple, because he knows he's about to rev it up and get complex, and that's one of the earliest and best clear examples of internal rhyme scheme patterns snuck into these simple presentations. But put all these together, they're all different flows in one verse that, if you're sleeping, just sounds simplistic, but if you're really paying attention, or even if you're not, casually and subconsciously, you understand that this is something that just feels different. I'll add another example, what he did on As the Rhyme Goes On, where he's like, "You physically in this with me, but how could I tell if it's meant to be hip-hop if you're not mentally as well?" Complex, physically, and you can argue that the ending portions of those words, right, the ALLY with the mentally ALY, feed off each other. They line up with each other. It's not an exact rhyme, but they line up position wise, right? Physically in this with me, meant to be still lining up with the in this with me, physically and mentally all at the same time, syllable wise. And then, of course, the pure rhyme of tell landing with well, but in a real different sentence structure than anything else on this song, or anything else on the album. It's a lot of syllables if you break down the count. I mean, and these are not like great differentials in flow. It's not like, oh, this flow here is so noticeably different. But for such a short album to get a range like I Know You Got Soul and My Melody, you're hearing something new. You're hearing that this man is capable of doing the same packed syllables, whether he's rhyming slow or fast. That's what's super impressive about the flow and how this became a new marker, ushering in a new reign. And he's forever been crowned the game changer since then. All right, so something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5, the word play and bar intent. Okay, man has told you he's serious. Nobody's smiling. It's no joke. Of course, there's going to be a lot of intention in what he's saying behind these bars. The songs themselves are themed, even though he mentions the mic repeatedly. He's talking about it in different ways. Move the Crowd is really about the science and his personal philosophy and credo on how to get the crowd working and, moving as he intended it in his head. I Ain't No Joke is really about rocking the mic and being taken seriously and telling all competition to fall back. Eric B is president, and I know you guys saw a really party rocking. And as the rhyme goes on, and my melody are really just about his love affair with the mic itself and having command of it. So within those different approaches to talking about rocking the mic, you get in different ways. You would think, man, how many times can you talk about it? But he finds different ways every time. And imagery is going to be his biggest tool. Talking about watching the mic smoke, talking about I start to think and then I sink into the paper like I was ink. When I'm writing, I'm trapped in between the lines. I escape when I finish the rhyme. We're talking about metaphor and simile in the same couplet. That is, you call it accidental or intentional, but that is wordplay at its finest, especially if we're talking about 80s. And I hate doing that. I hate trying to level the playing field by what's out, because there were plenty of clever rappers at that time. And it's not like metaphors didn't exist, but rarely do you hear metaphors and similes used so well. And that's one of the most foundational examples of early wordplay and how to do it clean, where it's digestible. So you're getting things like that. The famous line, of course, where he's using the math of taking 7 MCs, take 7 more who think they can rhyme, and then it'll be 7 more, and it's 21 MCs ate up at the same time. It sounds so simplistic now when we think about it, but you have to understand how braggadocious rap was expressed back then. It's loud, it's boisterous, it's very obvious. It's LL Cool J saying, and I'm notorious, I crush you like a jelly bean. It's not this, let me rewind that and make sure the math is math, and let me see what he's talking about. Who even thinks like this? Rough enough to break New York from Long Island. It's just where he's pulling these references in different ways to tell you what he does on the microphone is where the cleverness is. There's no humor, but these connections are the other part of the Rakim mythos, which made it such a big deal how he came in with this album, because the way that he was putting words together was not done prior. So, okay, the flows might have been touched before, but he's now owning this flow, making it his own with his distinct delivery and this distinct putting together of words. It's not because of this extensive vocabulary. He's blending God body talking seamlessly with digestible party talk. There was a recent clip from an interview with Ed Lover sitting next to Rakim, giving him his flowers and telling him how important he is to the game and how impactful it is that he came in doing what he did, which really, really created a paradigm shift for hip hop. And let people know it's okay to use your regular voice. You don't have to go out your way. You can project without, booming. And your boom could be in the form of what you say. And what he's saying is what left its mark. Ed Lover goes on to use that 7 MCs line as an example. And then he goes on to use the line that I mentioned earlier about spelling his name. You could call me Ra, switch it around. Either way, it's the R. That is wordplay. That is rewind factor. Even in this late 80s form, we're playing tapes, man. We're playing cassettes back then. You're taping it off the radio. You have to rewind that to think about it. It's like, oh, if I switch it backward, it's AR, and AR is pronounced R. That's wordplay. And I mean, you get simple lines, but even the simple lines have gone down in history. We'll talk about that as we move into the next dimension. These are all things to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when we're talking about wordplay and bar intent. Dimension 6, punchlines, poetic wisdom, overall quotability. I cannot talk enough about how quoted and overquoted almost every other line from this album has been throughout hip-hop history. We got everything from I'm the R, the A to the K I am. If I wasn't, then why would I say I am? Eminem went on to interpolate that for one of his biggest singles, The Way I Am. Almost every line from I Ain't No Joke. I wake you up, and as I stare in your face, you seem stunned. Remember me, the one you got your idea from? Soon you see like Paid in Full has been redone, done over so many times. I don't like to dream about getting paid, so I dig into the all of that. Thinking of a master plan. Let's go. See if how many songs you all can name that have homaged, interpreted, remixed, swagger jacked, however you want to call it, lines from this album. They left that much of an impression on the game. And this is him not even trying to make punchlines. Again, the punchlines come very few and far between. The punchlines, when he's trying, are going to come out really simplistic and not as effective. Like, thought I was a donut, she tried to glaze me. That's when he's trying. When he's not trying, he's saying some masterful stuff. Why waste time on the microphone? I take this more serious than just the poem. You're getting poetic wisdom in there because tracks like Move the Crowd, and as the rhyme goes on, he's really breaking down his philosophy on how to rock the mic and why he loves rocking the mic. And so if you read it, it really comes out as a love letter to one, the audience, and to the mic. And then you take a track like Paid in Full, and he really is leaving some jewels. Search for a 9 to 5, and if I strive, then maybe I stay alive. Simple, but for somebody to tell you they used to do crime and they're still trying to strive and they're not above a 9 to 5, big messaging back there. It fell upon deaf ears, obviously, because we're talking about the crack era. We all know what came of that. Poetic wisdom is sprinkled in there. It's not the dominant thing. Neither are punchlines, but they're all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to dimension 7, the concepts. All right, your biggest concept here is Eric B as president and Move the Crowd. Eric B as president is so loose. He's not really talking about nominating Eric B for president on here. It's just a cool title. He wanted to big him up. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, in his book, he said Eric B came up with that title, or Marley Marl. He goes off into a story in the midst of it about the young lady that he met who tried to play him. Most of it is about rocking the party. So, I mean, it's not a concept song at all, but it's conceptual in title. And every verse does go back to the idea of clap for the DJ. Move the Crowd, again, is about him breaking down why it's important, what he does to get the audience moving. That's really about it. Concepts aren't a focal point here. Again, it's a very short album if you're not counting the 2 Eric B solo cuts, Eric B on the mix, and Chinese Arithmetic. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, how much this impacts or affects the album. If it doesn't impact it at all, you know what to do. If it does, then you know what to do. Takes us to dimensions 8 and dimensions 9. We talk about the content. Dimension 8, the externalized content. How much is Rakim talking about outside of his own bubble? The bubble is an interesting bubble because it's not really about him or about life outside of rocking the mic. Yeah, this is not the version of Rakim that's talking about the ghetto, pass the hand grenade, know the ledge. This is not him in that form yet. So there's no outside world beyond this stage and this wax. It's little to none if we're talking on that level. Something to consider on the scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to dimension 9, the internalized content. The closest you get there is Paid in Full, where you get a little autobiographical detail on Rakim's past. Again, how much you believe it, but he's still deviating from the dominant theme on the album to talk about that. And that's about it as far as any expository stuff, any big revelations, any feelings outside of rocking the mic. Whether that's a strength or weakness, remember it is a short album. That is a standout song, which is only 1 verse long. So that can be considered the content for the album. All something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to the final dimension, dimension 10, storytelling. Storytelling, you're going to get pieces of it on Eric B as president. Like I said, he mentioned the young lady, and then Paid in Full, where it's all about him finding his way to the lab to cut this record to make some money. And even the talking part kind of fulfills that story, right? Where Eric B is like, yo, I'm gonna go see my girl, you go see yours, because I know they mad at all the time we spent on making this album. And he's like, all right, I guess we done. Let's wait for the money to be made, because we're trying to get paid in full. And he's telling you his past method of being paid in full and his current directive to get to this future method of being paid in full. It's always good when title tracks live up to their name, especially if they're going to be a song on the album and not just the title, and it executes that. So again, on a short album, maybe that's all the story you need, 1.5 stories. Up to y'all to decide on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. On that note, that concludes this category 2 review of the classic Paid in Full by Eric B and Rakim, the debut album, the album that put Rakim on the map and created the God MC conversation. It's only right we had to close it out. We had to bring this full circle back to the essence. Stay tuned. You know, I'm not officially endorsing, but I'm endorsing, you know what I mean? I like to keep my legendary businesses in business. Shout out to Walkerware. Shout out to Eames once again. I do rock these. I told y'all that was going to be quick, simple, just dipping in before the year's over, dipping back out. Y'all be safe out there. Keep it locked. Like and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Coming back with more fire for the new year. And thank y'all again. Y'all know what it is. Till next time, F a Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to meth.